The Fast and Furious franchise raced into theaters back in 2001 and brought with it flashy, high-octane action with themes of loyalty and family. That little racing movie has since blown up into Universal Pictures' highest-grossing franchise of all time with 8 sequels and 1 spin-off, and each film has only gotten bigger and crazier. So which Fast and the Furious movie is the fastest and most furious? That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Hey there, I'm Kristian from 1 Minute Critic for FilmIsNow. Now that the Fast and Furious' latest installment, Hobbs Shaw, is in theaters, it seems like the perfect time to take a look in that rear view and try to figure out which Fast and Furious movie is the best in the franchise. But before I begin this ranking, I'd love to hear your thoughts or see how you would rank the Fast and Furious movies, so go ahead and drop your list in the comments down below, and let's have a healthy discussion. And in an effort to keep this video from being over an hour long, I'm only going to give a few points for each movie, and there will be spoilers. Just so you know, the Fast and Furious is one of my guilty pleasures, and I'm a huge fan of the franchise. So I had a lot of fun revisiting all these movies for this ranking, and some choices were harder than others, but here's how I would rank all 9 of these movies in order from least favorite to favorite. Starting off in last place at number 9, The Fate of the Furious. Released in 2017 and directed by F. Gary Gray, The Fate of the Furious is the 8th film in the franchise and is the first movie in the franchise, if you don't count Tokyo Drift, without Jordana Brewster and Paul Walker, who tragically died in 2015. Dominic Toretto and his wife Letty have settled down when the global cyber terrorist Cypher, played by Charlize Theron, strong-arms them into working for her and turns Dom against the whole team. They're forced to join forces with Deckard Shaw and Luke Hobbs to find Dom and take down Cypher. Now this movie delivers really big on the action and has some pretty good comedy, but I just couldn't get past some of the character arcs. For example, I love Deckard Shaw, but I found it absolutely absurd that the team would welcome him into their team and seem to completely overlook the fact that he brutally murdered Han and blew up Dom's house, nearly killing Dom, Brian, Maya, and their baby in the process. But I really just couldn't get past that massive sea of driverless cars flooding the streets of New York. That was totally lame. That brings us to number 8, Too Fast, Too Furious. Released in 2003 and directed by John Singleton, this is the second film in the franchise and sees the return of only Paul Walker, while at the same time introducing Tyrese Gibson's character Roman Pierce and Ludacris's Tej Parker, who would eventually become franchise regulars. In this film, we follow Brian O'Connor, who goes undercover in Miami and teams up with his childhood friend Roman Pierce to bring down a major drug lord in exchange for erasure of their criminal records. But because there are almost no story or character ties to the previous movie, this film felt more like a spin-off than a sequel when it first hit theaters, and I think that's what ultimately turned most people off. But I will say the reintroduction of Roman and Tej in Fast 5 really improves the way this film fits into the whole franchise. Coming in at number 7, Fast and Furious. This 4th movie in the franchise was released in 2009 and is the second Fast and Furious film to be directed by Justin Lin. Following the events of Too Fast, Too Furious, we see Vin Diesel, Paul Walker, Michelle Rodriguez, and Jordana Brewster reunited for the first time since the very first film. Dom and now FBI agent Brian O'Connor are reunited and forced to work together to avenge the murder of Toretto's lover, Letty, and take down the drug lord responsible for her death. Now this is the first film in the franchise to really up the ante on the stunts, and where they start to break through into the unbelievable spectrum. I also consider this one to have one of the most ridiculous plots in the entire franchise. Now to number 6, Furious 7. Released in 2015 and directed by James Wan, this is the 7th film in the franchise that actually follows the events of Tokyo Drift, and sadly Paul Walker's final appearance in the series before his untimely death. This also marks the first time that Agent Hobbs meets and faces off against Deckard Shaw. Furious 7 follows the whole gang who have now returned to the US to live normal lives after being pardoned for their past crimes in Fast and Furious 6. That is until Deckard Shaw, a rogue Special Forces assassin played by Jason Statham, seeks revenge for his younger brother, who the team took down in the previous movie. Now the writing for this movie is all over the place, but it's pretty obvious most of the problems came because filmmakers had to do extensive rewrites and reshoots to change the film because of the tragic death of Paul Walker. So you can't really fault them too much for that, but I will say the tribute ending for Paul Walker at the very end of this one is one of the highlights of the entire franchise. That brings us to number 5, Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift. Released in 2006, this is the 3rd movie in the franchise and the first to be directed by Justin Lin, who went on to direct 4 others in the franchise. It's also the first to be written by Chris Morgan, who has penned every movie since. Now initially released as a spin-off, this movie introduced completely new characters and only featured a brief cameo from Vin Diesel at the very end of the movie. But filmmakers brilliantly developed a timeline for the franchise that eventually included this to take place after the events of 2015's Furious 7. We follow a troubled US teen who's forced to live with his father in Japan and finds himself pulled into Tokyo's underground drifting community. Now I have this movie higher on my list than most people would, and my reasoning is that not only are some of the driving stunts the most impressive, but this little movie straight up saved the entire franchise. That's because Vin Diesel's cameo garnered so much excitement from international audiences that Universal made a deal with him to return, which eventually led to Fast and Furious coming 3 years later, which acted as a second starting line for all the movies that followed. Now to number 4, The Fast and the Furious. Released in 2001 and directed by Rob Cohen, this is the movie that started it all. It's the first movie to introduce us to Dom and his whole crew. Undercover cop Brian O'Connor is assigned to infiltrate the underground street racing world in Los Angeles and try to find a group of racers wanted for several highway hijackings. Now, in the big scheme of things, the action in this movie is pretty basic. In fact, one could argue it's the most realistic movie in the entire franchise. But every billion-dollar franchise needs to start somewhere, right? And the plot of this movie is not very original. In fact, it's almost a beat-for-beat remake of the 1991 action thriller Point Break. But instead of an undercover cop infiltrating a group of bank-robbing surfers, we have an undercover cop infiltrating a group of freight hijacking street racers. Now, at number 3, Fast and Furious 6. Released in 2013, this is the 6th movie in the franchise and the final one to be directed by Justin Lin. The movie picks up immediately following the events of Fast 5. While living comfortably in hiding, Dom and the crew are recruited by Luke Hobbs to help take down a skilled mercenary organization led by Owen Shaw, played by Luke Evans. Now, this film continues to follow that formula that made Fast 5 such a great hit, with moving away from the street racing and spinning in more elements from popular spy and heist films. And the whole team continues to slowly approach superhero status by pulling off some pretty unbelievable stunts. But boy are they fun to watch. And that brings us to number 2, Fast and Furious presents Hobbs Shaw. Released in 2019, this is the 9th movie in the franchise and the first official spin-off. We follow the popular characters Luke Hobbs and Deckard Shaw, played by Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham, and the movie's directed by action master David Leitch, known for Deadpool 2 and John Wick. Now, in this most recent film, Special Agent Hobbs and former elite military operative Shaw are forced to work together despite having very low opinions of each other. And the rivalry between these two unstoppable forces only intensifies through their international adventure. Hobbs & Shaw is bigger, badder, and crazier than any other Fast and Furious movie we've seen so far. The plot's pretty generic, but let's be honest, nobody's watching this for the plot. The movie also goes all in on the action sequences while throwing all believability out the window. There are some pretty big surprises in this movie, and the Rock vs. Statham rivalry and banter is everything. This movie's just a lot of fun. And now we've come to my favorite Fast and Furious film, Fast 5. Released in 2011, this is the 5th movie in the franchise and is once again directed by Justin Lin. It's also the first movie in the franchise to bring characters from all the previous films together and introduces Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Luke Hobbs. It's also the official point of the franchise where they pivot away from the street racing emphasis and go full heist action. Following the events of 2009's Fast and Furious, Dom and Brian plan a heist to steal millions from a corrupt businessman in Brazil with the help of just about all their friends. And they try to do all this while fending off newcomer and badass diplomatic security service agent Luke Hobbs. For me, this movie has the best balance of action, suspense, and even some great comedy. The plot is easily the most engaging of the entire franchise, and yeah, this is where the realism really starts to go out the window. But the film is still way more grounded than just about every other movie that follows it. From the opening train heist to the closing vault chase scene, this movie is as perfect as a Fast and Furious movie can be. And that's why it's my favorite in the entire franchise. Well, there you have it, my take on the whole Fast and Furious franchise. But what do you think? Do you agree or disagree with my list? I'd love to see your rankings, so go ahead and drop your list in the comments below. And if you like this video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and share it with all your friends. Once again, I'm Kristian from 1 Minute Critic. Feel free to check out my channel where I do 1-minute movie reviews, ranking videos, and other movie-related content. The link for that is in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching Film Is Now, and we'll see you next time.